Welcome to Real Healing, Real Awakening. In this week's episode, we're going to have a more personal look at the 5-step process for healing, wisdom and empowerment through an interview with a good friend of mine named SINVAL. SINVAL began working with me using the 5-step process a few years ago, and I have had the pleasure of helping SINVAL on his journey of healing and awakening ever since. I am conducting this interview within one of the rooms of my healing and counselling centre in Brisbane. There's a bit of activity around, so if you hear some noise in the background, it's probably a yoga group upstairs. So welcome SINVAL to Real Healing, Real Awakening. It's great to have you along to my radio show, and it's a very different environment to what we used to hang out in a meditation group. So welcome to this new experience, and thank you very much for coming in and being prepared to really reveal your life on radio.
Hello everybody, yes, my name is SINVAL. It's a pleasure to be here talking about my life's experience.
Thanks SINVAL, and you've been a meditation student and with me for about 3 or 4 years using the 5-step process. It's one of the main reasons I asked you in, because I know that you've really made some enormous differences in your life and have really dedicated yourself to this self-realization process, and you have a lot of wisdom and insight to share. But before we get into that, I'm interested in your background, SINVAL, your childhood, your starting point, and how that has influenced you to wanting to reach out later on when we met.
Yes, my background basically, I was born in Brazil, in the northeast of Brazil, a poor part of the country, and I had some difficulties on my upbringing because I came from a large family, many children, a young mother and an alcoholic father, and that really posed some difficulties in my childhood.
So what did the alcoholism and the age gap between your mother and father, what did that bring into the mix of the family environment?
The main issue was really domestic violence, because being drinking, my father often would come home violent and committed some abuse against my mother and us. And somehow, I being a little bit different child, different from my brother, I would say my older brother was much closer to my father than me. My father kind of took it on me. I was often beaten up by my father as opposed to my older brother, and this set the scene for me to feel rejected and quite isolated from in the family situation. I couldn't really fit in well, and I felt quite different.
So what about your mum? I mean, how was she coping? How was she dealing with that experience, that environment?
My mother didn't have much time for us, because having so many children to look after and working as she did at home and with my father's business, because my father had a different kind of business and my mother looked after boarding house for guests, so she had to shop and cook and do so many things, so she didn't really have much time for us. Despite that, she was a very good mother, and she did the best that she could, and I owe her a lot of the support that I gained against my father, because in many occasions that he would perhaps put me down and not allow me to receive some of the care that he would grant to my brother. My mother would take my defense, and perhaps that's how I got a place in life, because of her.
All right, so she was much more of a stable, nurturing influence, even though she was really just trying to survive and often not really being able to take or spend enough time with her children, you in particular?
Well, because she was, as I said, a young mother, she started life at the age of 14 and she had 14 pregnancies. She didn't really have that maternal love that we like to think every mother would devote to the children. So I never I questioned that, but I could never blame my mother for that lack of apparent love. Although I do believe that by doing what she did, working hard and keeping the family together, that was the way she could express that love.
Yeah.
And she still is, a strong woman, and she was the heroine of the family, and we all like to think that way because she suffered a lot herself, and the result was the family we had, really. And I'm glad that these days I can help her and support my mother the way I do.
Mm. And so, your experience with your siblings, did you have a close connection with any of your siblings? Was it a close family in that regard?
Well, because we are so many and we had difficulties with money, often we fought, and my greatest difficulty was with my older brother because he was very close to my father, and I was a bit of a different child because I am gay, and as a child I already showed signs of that. I discovered at a very early age that I was different, and being in a very macho country where men are supposed to be men and boys are supposed to speak like men, I was often criticized and asked to show proof that I was as macho as the other boys. Of course I couldn't. I found all of that, meaningless, and I was pretty much ostracized and felt isolated by those circumstances.
What did your father think about your differences?
Well, as I said, my father never looked at me. My father never spoke to me. I could never hear him. I only had a relationship of violence with my father. The only time when he approached me was only to beat me up. And he used his belt, and that was the way of expressing his care, was all for the good of me, of course, and I had to take it on my skin. And therefore, I couldn't really tell whether it was because I wasn't an easy child or because I showed signs of what they didn't like. The only time when my father really said clearly to me that I was not very well regarded was when I was holding a baby in my arms, and my father told me that I was not supposed to hold the baby the way I was doing. I was 14 years old, and he said that was for girls, not for a man to hold a baby. That tells you what sort of mentality and what sort of man my father had been raised to be, because then he expressed clearly, you look like a bit feminine and I don't like it.
Mm. So there was a lot of prejudice that you experienced around your gayness, your difference.
Yeah,
To
especially
your brothers.
at that age. My sisters, I have 5 sisters, and I must confess I get along well with my sisters. I never had many issues with them. I particularly am very close to one of my sisters, and I open up to her very early in life, and she supported me. But with the other men in a small town, like I said, it was not easy to find friends, and for that reason I isolated myself in my own space and tried to find refuge in other houses, in other families, because I couldn't really find it in my own family. Although I had problems with my brother at home, somehow the sisters kind of gave me some comfort and I identified pretty much with my mother and my sisters, as opposed to the relationship I had with my brother.
And so moving from being the young boy surviving in that environment and moving into your teenage years, what sort of a teenager were you? What were you feeling as a teenager? How was your self-image as a teenager?
Well, my first reaction was really to isolate myself, and I couldn't really go out. Every time when I saw a bunch of people having fun, I would shy away from it because I know there would be some aggression towards me. I kind of got used to the fact that they always criticized me for being the way I was. You know, as a teenager, we all have difference in voice, pitch, and we are learning to find our own identity. And it wasn't easy not to find any place where I could feel comfortable with in a small town where everybody knows about everybody. So my first idea of suicide came when I was 15 years old, and I intended to perhaps find some way of killing myself, because I didn't see much point in leading a life which was fake, to say the least. I couldn't really be myself, and I wouldn't see any hope of relating to people the way they lived in those times. You know, I'm talking about the 60s here, and back then in a country like Brazil, it was pretty tough under dictatorship, and men are supposed to be men, and police are out there on the streets to do whatever they can to keep things in order. So I didn't have much hope really, and I thought, what's the point in living?
So as a 15-year-old feeling quite alone, quite hopeless, quite desperate in your own self.
And being criticized by my brother and not even regarded by my father. So I really didn't see much hope at all, until somehow there was an idea of giving us a bit of education, better education in the big city. And I wasn't supposed to go because my father thought, not going to send you, I'm going to send only the older brother. But my mother interceded and said, no, if he doesn't go, I will do something. And she was, you know, decided to work harder, whatever she could do to send me to have an education. And I owe to her that the fact that I end up getting a similar education as my brother.
So do you think that was your saving grace for, you know, getting out of that environment and into the big city, and where you could lose yourself a bit more and start to build a self-esteem through education? Or?
Definitely, it was the opportunity which I was being given. And once in the big city, despite all the repression from my older brother, because he didn't want me to do anything that wasn't under his control, I saw life in a different way. And of course, when I was about to get a little bit free, he said things to me which made me really cut down in all what I was attempting to do. There was meeting people, going out, and discovering an identity which was forbidden for me to have. He told me that if I carried on with my behavior, because I had met some people like me, other gay people young as me at the age of 15 or 16, that he would send me back to the little town, and I had no choice. I had to behave. And of course he's been so serious and so repressive, because he often, you know, paired up with my father in repressing me. Then I had no choice but just go in again and inside me and feel more desperate and not having any hope of growing up as I could be.
So even though you left the small town environment, you still had your brother watching over you and continuing to try to keep that family influence of control, that expectation of, the Brazilian manhood.
Would fulfill, what is expected from a man. And because he had his mates and he was ashamed of me, he had to make me ashamed of myself. And that's the shame which I carried with me all along. And until the age of 19 years old, 18, 19, that's when I had my first job and I left home. I could not really relate to anything else other than that big shame, which was to be me.
So tell me about your first experience of really meeting people who showed you loving kindness, who really cared for you. What was your first experience of a mentor, and perhaps meeting with some sort of a spirituality or a personal awareness?
Very interesting, this question, Phil, because when I had my first job in a steelworks factory back in the country, in Brazil, I was quite of a suicidal person, and I bought a push bike, and I used to fall from that push bike going to work almost every day. So I'll arrive at work bleeding, and my boss, an immigrant from Yugoslavia after the war, he went to Brazil. He would speak with a very funny accent. He would say, one day you have to pick up your pieces and send back to your mom in the big city because, a disaster. And he had the idea to send me to a psychologist, a company psychologist, just to talk and see whether he could help me. And when I got there, I never forget this man. His name was John Neri. And he sat me there, and then he started talking to me. And he had published books about psychology and people, and he really helped me to look at myself in a different light, to accept myself as I was instead of trying to fit in. And since then I realized that I couldn't overcome all my difficulties myself. I needed help, and I went from one to another because I moved out of that place where I was working. I quit the job after 2 years, and he gave me the name of another person who I went to see, and then it followed on from there.
So he really gave you an experience of a lifeline, that the kindness that your boss showed you enabled you to experience outside help that actually was effective, that cared for you, that gave you hope.
Exactly. Despite me not liking much that boss, he still have quite a lot of sympathy for me. Perhaps coming from a war situation when he went to Brazil, maybe it touched him that I was so problematic, and sent me to the psychologist. I really thank him for that. Don't know where he must be now, probably dead. But yeah, it was great, and having had that hand really saved me. If I look now with hindsight, that was the case.
And any other experiences whilst you were still in Brazil of people showing you kindness and really having a significant role in building your resilience and helping bringing that out?
Well, I could never forget to mention my best friend. We're still friends, I met her in 73, and we're still very good friends, traveling together again at the end of this year. And she's a psychologist herself. We met at the age of 16, and I saw her as a mother figure, and she really took care of me all along my life. I could never deny that. From the very beginning, she noticed how I was needy and how difficult it was for me to live within my family, and she brought me to her family and nurtured me and showed love and kindness. And to these days, we are very close together. We have a very good relationship, and I must say honestly that I owe to her a lot of what I have in this life. I'll never forget that person. And also a boss that I had later on, and he also was like a father figure for me. That when I was 19, 20 years old, and those people, believe me, are perhaps the most important people in my life.
So these are the important things, isn't it? The very, very difficult experiences that you had in childhood and that crushed your self-esteem and led you to feeling, in quite a state of despair as a teenager, and then moving into young adulthood and being offered these lifelines just through, supposed coincidence, although we would look at it a bit different now, wouldn't we, as, like some sort of a high guidance looking after you, ensuring that you survive and for the opportunity to be able to grow, perhaps.
I like to think that I do have a guardian angel. I had proof of this. And without this guardian angel, I couldn't have survived the way I did, facing situations that were pretty much the end, pretty much bring the end of me. And this guardian angel is always hovering above me. I do believe in that. And the people who helped me, I guess, could have been guided by this guardian angel. Yes. In a way, because they did do good for me, and I owe a lot to them.
So what brought you out to Australia, SINVAL?
I've been here 19 years. 1989 was really the possibility of finding a fairer system of life, because in Brazil the injustices, the social circumstances that create so much injustice was always a factor in creating a revolt in me against watching so much misery and poverty and violence. So I thought there must be a better way of living. I don't want to die in this country without experimenting a different life. And I dreamed about a place where corruption wouldn't be so endemic, because that is the main issue in third world countries. It's not lack of resources, no, it's not. It's not lack of goodwill, no, it's not. It's corruption, because what is there is not shared. It's just in the hands of a few, and the majority has just to obey and do what they are told. And because it has always been like that, people think that will always be like that. So I thought, maybe in a different country, maybe in a country where people do not lie as a way of life, do not exploit others as a way of life. And Australia seemed to be a far distant dream that I could pursue. And I caught myself saying this at the age of 16 or 17, when I mentioned to my relatives that I didn't want to live in Brazil anymore. One day I would get out and I would go to Australia. Of course, I could only realize that 13 years later, no, much longer, 15 years later. And I don't know, was perhaps destined to come here. Sometimes I like to think that there was some premonition or precondition that I would come to Australia. It was part of my karma.
Well, it certainly has given you a lot more opportunities, or a lot of opportunities, isn't it, for your personal growth? Now, I'd like to take just a little break here to remind our listeners that this is Real Healing, Real Awakening, and my name is Phil Golding, and I'm conducting an interview with my good friend SINVAL. SINVAL has been journeying with me for a number of years now, putting the 5-step process for healing, wisdom and empowerment into his life. Let's talk more, therefore, about your experiences with the process. We've looked at your background and what has brought you to this point of reaching out, coming to my centre, having been in Australia for a number of years?
Well, for the skeptical, I probably could spare the comments I'm gonna make. But for those who believe a little bit in, other sciences, I went to see a clairvoyant in Perth, in Fremantle, a present given by a friend, and he told me to watch a sign on a paper. There was a sign of a sun, and when I found the paper and I saw that sun, there was something related to psychosynthesis, and we thought, well, what is that? And then we investigated with his friend, and we found something to do with, looking at the therapy of integrating mind, body, and soul, which is something Phil professes very well. My friend searched a bit on the internet and found 2 centers in Brisbane who had people working with psychosynthesis, and one of them was Phil, who had a practice a bit nearer to where I live. And that's where I came to, because the idea then was to look for a healing not only at the mind and body level, but at the soul level, because we just realized there was more to search, not only within my own mind, but within my soul. And of course this wasn't very obvious at the time to me. It's more conscious now that I was looking for that aspect of me. But at the time when the clairvoyant told me so many things about me which I had never heard before from anybody, it really opened up my eyes to other realities that I was oblivious of, and perhaps conducted me to, or conveyed me to, come and meet Phil.
So there was a real synchronicity at work in you coming to this centre and meeting me.
Yes, at the right time, after I had been given, a sign or a warning of things to come, and I came to see Phil. And I remember calling you and saying, I have few things to work on. They are very specific, and I would like not those psychotherapies that last 10 years like I had done before. And Phil said he had some ideas and would like to talk to me about. And when I saw Phil for the first time and he talked about meditation, I kind of rejected the whole thing, because I always refused to think about meditation. One of my best friends does meditation for a long time, but I could never relate to that.
Okay, so what frame of mind were you in when you first reached out to me, SINVAL?
Oh, looking back, 3.5 years ago almost, I was pretty much disillusioned with everything. I saw this dark path, a tunnel without a light in the end. I could not figure out where I was going and what was about this life I was looking for. And I specifically said that I wanted to find meaning in life, and I wanted you to help me. And therefore there were aspects of me that I found so unresolved, and I couldn't really carry on living that way. And specifically, I must confess to you, the idea of suicide never left my mind. Until then, I always thought about giving an end to my life, because it was so meaningless. I couldn't see much point in going on living. Very anguished, very depressed in many cases, very sad, very isolated, and feeling not worth living, really. That's basically how I found myself when I came to see you.
I can certainly remember how you were at the beginning. There was certainly not a lot of trust or faith in life, and a lot of hope, really, in a fulfilling or happy life.
couldn't believe in life, basically.
Yeah,
I thought it
yeah.
was a waste of time to be here.
Mm,
And my clairvoyant, as I mentioned before, he said that I had come to this world kicking and screaming.
yeah.
I didn't want to be here. I don't know if I believe in that or not. The fact is, I had this strong rejection of life. Of course, a lot to do with my background and some of my karma stuff, which I must confess must have an influence in that rejection of life. So what unveiled since then, of course, was just deep ingrained feelings of self-rejection, and I had to work very hard on them. And what Phil showed to me was a path which included self-observation as the main tool through the meditation practice. And once I got rid of that feeling that I didn't want to use meditation, and I embraced it, guided by Phil initially, because that's how you did, the guided meditation in your practice. And then I learned to look deep inside myself and never forget the expression you use, that is clearing the junk from the backyard, that I had a lot of work to do to get rid of that junk. And you said, one bit at a time, one bit every day, and 3.5 years later, I think I got rid of 10%. But that 10% is more than enough to give me a lot of hope and belief in life, and to recover from any hurts or from situations that I face, on a daily basis or whatever basis, and bring me back to light and feel alive and happy to be here.
I think you're being a bit humble there with the 10%. In observing your growth over the last few years, the strength and the insight that you show these days, you're very much an inspiration for other people.
Yeah, actually, the people say that to me. People recognize that in me, how much I have changed. I've been more generous, perhaps because I'm very hard on me. A perfectionist, is my nature. And I would like to be in a better position. But yeah, I think 50% would be a fair amount to claim, to have cleared from that baggage, that emotional baggage that I brought to you. Definitely, I think 50%.
So let's move into now your specific experience around the 5-step process, for healing and wisdom and empowerment. Would have been right at the first session that we did together. I would have introduced you to the first step of total self-acceptance, and the second step of total personal responsibility. The two going together, of course, you can't really separate them out. And so what are your insights on that now, looking back on how you first started to integrate that and relate to those principles?
As you said very well, Phil, the self-acceptance being the first concept on the 5-step process really bring to our attention the self-rejection that we have within ourselves. And if we could face that initially, that would be the key to open up and look into yourself and be the observer of these mental processes that we all have, and that could reveal our true nature at the moment when we are either suffering or depressed or whatever.
But what specifically was your experience in that you recall?
One of the first experiences, for instance, was, I remember mentioning this to you, walking down the streets and feeling angry when somebody crossed my path. I thought to myself, because I was doing meditation then, I had never done it before, why do I get angry when someone is walking towards me on the street? Because it wouldn't make any sense, but only then I asked the question.
Yes.
So on my meditation, I asked that question again, and the answer came. Because when I was a child and I was walking down the streets of the little town where I grew up, there were some boys who just got stuck in front of me and say, "You don't walk here. You can't come here. It's not your territory." And if I insisted, they would beat me up. They would threaten to, to beat me, and they would really go after me with stones and want to hurt me. So I felt really threatened and scared of those boys.
So you discovered that through your meditation, through being able to tune in and observe those reactions coming up in you now, you're able to track it back to those seeds of experiences in your childhood.
Exactly, and that was the gift that I was given by becoming aware that the now was related to the then in the past, but it didn't have to be. I could look at the now, at the present, under a different light, because there was no boy on the street who would tell me not to pass, and yet that thing was imprinted on me. It was marked there, was recorded there, I had to react. So once I had that first experience, I thought, this works. And that was a revelation, because then I thought, what Phil says is true. What you said is true. I could, then carry on, and it's just the way it has been. Every time I have some issues, I take notes, I have my journal, I know that I have something to work on, and I just meditate on it and let it come.
It's quite powerful, isn't it, that how we carry on those old experiences and often relate to, in a background like your own, as living in a war zone, and years later we're still in that war zone even though that experience is gone. We're still relating to our life in the same way, on an unconscious level, on that unconscious emotional level.
Yes, and it is very important that we forgive ourselves for doing that, because many times we have no choice. Because you know how sometimes people say, forget about the past, move on, forget about the past, move on, and you feel guilty that you haven't moved on. But just remember that your experience is your experience, and it marked you and affected you in a way because you are you and you are not somebody else. It wouldn't do the same to my brother, for instance, as it did to me, but the first two steps on the five-step process, which is self-acceptance and personal responsibility, followed by unconditional love, were the key to say, hey, okay, I am this faulty being, I am this faulty person, but if I do not accept this and do not accept that I am this faulty person, and I can discover what broke me, what hurt me, I'll never get rid of this. I'll never be able to change. And that's where those steps are most valuable in my case.
So that realization of the importance of self-acceptance and being able to open your heart to your humanness really allowed you to step up and face yourself. Without that self-acceptance, in looking at yourself, would you even look at yourself before that, in that same way?
I don't think so. It was very hard for me to look into myself in the mirror, for instance. And I remember reading in one of your books that if you look at the mirror and you don't like what you see...
Yeah, but that importance of being able to look at yourself, into yourself, without that sense of self-rejection, without that sense of self-condemnation.
Self-condemnation and
shame and all that. Yeah. Yes, right, all that comes with it.
Yes, as I said earlier on, I couldn't hear my voice without feeling shamed, and I thought my voice had a hint of femininity in it, which many people said, no, I don't think so, but it was there, it was there, it was there. I don't think that has changed, but to this day I'm very comfortable with my voice and my own figure, and I can pretty much relate to me as, you know, a physical person the best that I can, definitely.
So we've been talking about the importance of the self-acceptance and the personal responsibility. How does the personal responsibility come into it for you? How do you relate to that?
Well, I used to be very reactive when came to relate to other people. So I would feel aggression coming from every corner, from anybody, and I would react accordingly, according to my feelings, not to what people were actually doing. So personal responsibility to me is to face the consequences of my acts, because if I react to you unconsciously in a way that might trigger in you other feelings of aggression, and I suffer the consequences of this, then of course it is my own fault. So I had to stop and think, hey, why am I getting angry with this person if perhaps what is happening here is not really personal? And to me, this concept of personal responsibility, not to be oversensitive to situations that were probably triggering old emotions in me, was quite important.
Therefore, if you react, should you condemn yourself? Should you see yourself as wrong or as shameful for reacting in that way?
You taught me to listen first and then think about it and perhaps react if I had to later. And by not answering straight away, even though my impulse was to reply to people saying whatever to me, I had the time to understand my own mental process and what was happening within me with my emotions, and change the old record to something a little bit better that could get better results in the social environments that I find myself in, basically.
In the first step, that total self-acceptance, which, as you were relating to, enabled you to really be able to look at yourself in the mirror in a way, to be able to face yourself without that self-condemnation, to be able to look in and start working with what was going on in your mind and what was going on in your subconscious. The deepest aspect of that self-acceptance is unconditional love. What was your journey toward comprehending what that was about? Because it's a very difficult thing to feel and to grasp, isn't it, unconditional love? So what did you remember in your awakening to this? What were your reactions first of that notion of unconditional love?
Oh, listen, when you used to self-hate, to hate yourself because you've been taught, you've been conditioned to hate yourself because you are not a model, because you are not what they expected from you, either your parents or society, and being gay is pretty much in evidence here, because most gay people are ostracized, most gay people are rejected, are discriminated. I couldn't really love myself. I couldn't really relate to this concept. On an unconscious level, I was rejecting myself all the time. And it took a long time, at least 1 year since the beginning that I started coming to see you, that I acquired this sense of unconditional love. And of course, I never forget the words, fake it until you make it, that I need to keep repeating this in my mind artificially, you know. And I do remember in my meditations repeating like a mantra, self-acceptance, unconditional love.
So by meaning fake
times.
it until you make it, and I'm certainly aware of, that's something I tell people, because it starts off on a conceptual level first, doesn't it?
That's right.
And then also an intuitive feeling level, isn't it? We
Intuitive.
know on an intuitive feeling level that unconditional love is that ultimate force in the universe. But is it available for me? That doubt and that lack of experience of it, and as you say, that self-hate still creates a bubble around us.
Because that's what I expected.
Yeah.
You to love me. I didn't come here to see you and pay you, whatever money to have a session and not to be loved. All I wanted was to be loved, to have a good hug in the end and leave this place feeling that I was worthy of something because you had given that to me. But that's not what you told me.
That's right. I said, love yourself.
Exactly. And that's what the whole thing came crashing, because I thought, well, what's the point? I don't love myself anyway.
Yes.
And that was the exercise. And after many sessions, with myself, and then facing the mirror and so on, and writing my journal, I slowly came to realize that the key ingredient in this whole process of life, not the process of self-healing, the process of life is unconditional love towards the lower self, towards yourself. Because if you do not do it, nobody else will. So you're lost. Those who lose themselves lost everything. There's no hope, really. And that was the key.
And so the doorway into that was first the self-acceptance, which was easier to relate to. You could step into that and start to observe yourself from that perspective, accepting your humanness.
Exactly.
But from there, looking into deeper and deeper concepts or awareness, or being able to be more brave in regards to considering unconditional love as something that flows right through you, into you, because you were endeavouring to be that for yourself.
The feathering of the child that you left behind, basically. And that's a concept which I defend a lot, because it seems quite foreign to many people that you will be fathering that child. But what else can you do?
Yeah.
Who is going to do it?
So developing that conscious relationship with the SINVA'L that was still left in Brazil.
Exactly. And I've been practicing this, as you said, for 3.5 years. And in my daily practice, I write first the points that I want to meditate on, and then I write to my inner child in my native language, Portuguese. And I from the beginning here, I discussed that with you. I thought it was more genuine to write in my own language, which I rejected in many ways after I came to Australia.
Yeah. But it's a language that the boy in you relates more to, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that really was a key for that boy to listen to me and believe that I was taking care of all those issues that plagued us, and therefore we could become one eventually. And that's the hope, of course, to become one.
Yes, and so this ongoing relationship between you as conscious awareness, the SINVA'L that you are now, learning to be that representative of unconditional love, to the wounded boy SINVA'L, still caught up in your subconscious, still caught up in the memory mind.
And that's the most important concept that you have to grasp. That is, you always will have that wounded boy within yourself, and just learn to accept him and live with him. And when he's triggered and he comes up, be ready for that. And after many years, of course, it's less often that you find the hurt boy or entity within yourself. It's less frequent that you have to face this, but when we start the process, that's all what it is. And whatever triggers the old hurts, you know what you have to do, and you go back there. There he is waiting for you, and your nurturing and your parenting and your understanding and your unconditional love. And that's all what it is, really. quite simple, and I think we adults fail to understand this because we are adult children and we haven't been taught really to love ourselves.
So, in other words, instead of being conscious awareness, looking after the child within us that is in our mind, that is in the the conditioning and the socialization that is still very active in our mind, instead of being the guardian or the parent of that self, you're saying we're actually being that boy, being that confused child walking around in an adult body.
Yes, that's what we do really, because every time when there are situations which we need to be an adult, the person who is reacting really is the boy, and the idea then is to accept the boy and try to change the old record, and react in a more enlightened way as an adult we are, without condemning the boy for reacting the way he does, but accepting and trying to change the reactions that you still might have within yourself due to the old hurts.
Yes. And so the meeting place between you as conscious awareness and the boy in you, this is step 3, isn't it? The letting go and the tuning in. It's about the healing and the clarity.
That's right.
So where do you... It's quite abstract really though, isn't it? It's quite difficult to talk about this step 3 process because of its abstractness. It's an emotional, feeling, conceptual space where a space is open for feeling, for us to meet ourselves on many levels. So how do you relate to it?
Honestly, I can only relate to this concept, as you said, so abstract because of the meditation. There is no other way.
Yeah.
And as much as traditional psychology doesn't support meditation as a key tool for resolving our personal issues, if you do not give yourself that space and time to look into yourself and try to make the two relate, like the old hurts in the boy and the adult reacting now, it's almost impossible. For me, as abstract as this can be, it's a matter of having an issue to work on and knowing that this happened today, and then going back to my corner and thinking, well, why did I say that to that person? And there are ways of doing this. In my case, can be a specific music song that I play.
So you try to, in your meditation, get back to the feeling of
that experience, and then I travel back into the old feeling, and I think, there you are. So you reacted to that person because of that feeling. I see, but there's no need. And it changes. After that, it changes. You no longer react the same way.
And when you discover that reactive part of yourself, you see that part as a boy. Is that when you have found the boy in you?
Yes, that's when I found the boy in me, so hopeless, so lost, so sad, so, covered in tears and bruises and so on. And was very hard to, face this, because you come to realize that's what you've been carrying all along. This battered and bruised little person that no one cared about.
So bring that into a visualization. How do you picture yourself as conscious awareness being with that boy? What does it look like for you?
These days I see much more of a guardian angel, I mentioned this before, that is within myself, almost like a higher power that I do have, and which can have the strength and the willingness to pick up that boy from wherever he might be in this process and carry him to a safe place and say, well, it was then, but it's not as bad now. And then I more and more.
Not as bad now? Why?
Well, because I know the feeling of feeling more comfortable, of feeling safer, of going back to a safe haven.
So you mean, so you're offering that boy that sanctuary that is
sanctuary
in you now, that you've created in
that
your
you
own
mentioned,
awareness.
that you refer so much as the sanctuary of the heart, and these are the feelings that I have. And if I can now feel much better within myself, this consciousness of strength and power which I have acquired along these years are enough to go back to those situations in my memory that I lived and which hurt me so much, and pick up the pieces and say, well, let's put this in the right place. It's almost divided, you know, as I have told to you a few times, this higher consciousness that is strong and clear, and the lower self which is hurt and confused and angry and upset and can be triggered at any time.
Yeah.
It's not a miracle, believe me. This doesn't solve all the problems in your life, but it is a very powerful tool to go back to where you have to go, to those moments, to those instants of your existence that did not go very well, and bring you back to the present and heal it and make you stronger as a person that you are now.
And moving into step 4, creating your life now, the life that you create for yourself now. How do you see yourself dealing with the ongoing issues that come into your life now that you need to face?
It works for me in regards to, practical situations, such as work. For instance, when I have to make decisions and take care of myself, and not let things take control of me, like overwork, something I never like to do. If I don't watch, I end up working more than I want. So I am very strong in saying, hey, I have a life to live and I can't do this, for instance. Whereas before, I would be scared of facing people in work situation and saying clearly, I don't want this. Now I can very easily say, I'm worth every cent that you pay me. And I say this very proud and honestly. Secondly, if things come my way and I see an opportunity for growth, I don't hesitate. I meet people and I just say, well, I met this person and there must be something there for me. What is it? I go and explore, and I go along and I talk to this person and I open up and I'm honest until the point when I can be more honest and say what I want or what I expect from that person, and then I have the results, whatever I have to have. If I feel frustrated, I will go back to me, like you taught me to do, go back to your heart and see that is all is there, and recover from whatever that person might have caused in me. These are like 2 examples of how you can face life in a healthier way, instead of letting circumstances and events overpower you and bring you down.
In your outlook on life now, do you think it's hopeful, positive? Do you feel confident in being able to work with whatever comes along in life now?
I believe so. I believe that now I have the power in my hands to face any situation and make a conscious decision of what is best for me. Of course, I would like to make decisions that could lead me to realize other potentials that I still believe I can do, I can have, and have a more fulfilled life. And of course, this is the other 50%, which I mentioned before. But I'm working on this, and I believe that the way I'm going, it will be conducive to these decisions to be made. And because I am guided by these high principles of unconditional love and personal responsibility in every action that I make or that I take, the only result is going to be good.
Thank you, SINVAL. It's been a pleasure sharing this time with you.
It's been a pleasure to talk about this, because this has changed my life.
Well, that's it for this week's show. I hope you have enjoyed my chat with my friend SINVAL. I hope you have related to what we've talked about and gained benefit from it. In next week's episode, we will continue to explore the philosophy of real healing, real awakening, through some general questions that will take us deeper into and clarify a few issues around the 5-step process. Be a guardian angel to your vulnerable human self, and you will always find love will warm your heart. For wisdom is intelligent love in action.